He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You've been useless to me this whole time." I couldn't believe the words coming from the man I trusted with my life. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lena Harper, and for years, I devoted myself entirely to my marriage. I always put Trent first, from small daily gestures to major life decisions. I believed love was about sacrifice, about giving your all to someone who promised to do the same. For a while, it seemed that's exactly what I had. Trent Calloway was a man people admired. He was successful, confident, and always appeared charming to the outside world. But beneath that polished exterior, he was distant, emotionally unavailable, and quietly critical. I told myself it was just his personality, that he worked hard, and that our life together, the comfortable home, quiet suburban neighborhood, and stable routines, was worth enduring a few rough edges. We had built a life that many would envy. Our house was spacious but cozy, filled with memories I thought we would cherish forever. Weekend mornings, we would sip coffee in the sunlit kitchen. Weeknights were filled with quiet dinners, sometimes soft music playing, sometimes silence. I cooked, cleaned, and supported him in ways I thought he appreciated. I made sacrifices I never complained about, believing it was part of being a good wife. Yet, as the months passed, Trent's appreciation seemed to shrink. Small criticisms became sharper. Subtle digs turned into outright remarks about my abilities. At first, I brushed them off, thinking maybe stress at work was affecting him. I tried talking, gently asking if something was wrong, if he needed support. But each time, he dismissed my concerns, claiming I didn't understand his world, that I was too sensitive. I held on to hope. I believed that love could weather moments of distance, and that our bond was strong enough to survive this quiet drift. I wanted to see the good in him, to believe the life we had built together still meant something. Then came the day that shattered everything. Those words, "You've been useless to me this whole time," hit me like a punch to the chest. It wasn't just an insult, it was the final act of betrayal. The man I had trusted implicitly, the man I had built my life around, had suddenly dismissed everything I had given him as worthless. I felt my world tilt, the floor beneath me cracking. Our home, our memories, our shared years, all of it seemed to crumble in an instant. And yet, amid the shock and pain, a tiny flicker of something else sparked inside me, clarity. This was a breaking point, yes, but also a moment that would define the next chapter of my life. At first, the signs were almost invisible. Small moments that could have been overlooked slowly began to pile up, leaving a strange tension in our home. Trent started responding to my efforts with irritation instead of gratitude. When I prepared dinner, he would comment on the seasoning or complain that I didn't follow a recipe exactly. I tried to brush it off, telling myself everyone has off days, but the frequency made it harder to ignore. Even my attempts to support him financially or organize household matters became points of criticism. If I paid a bill slightly early, he would say I was wasting money. If I suggested a practical solution for a minor issue at home, he dismissed it with a condescending smile. His tone carried a sharpness I hadn't recognized before, a subtle undercurrent that made me doubt myself. I wondered if I was imagining it, but the discomfort was too consistent to ignore. Then came the business trips. At first, they were routine, 1 or 2 nights away, nothing unusual. But gradually they stretched longer, sometimes a week, sometimes more, and his explanations became vague. I asked simple questions about his schedule, about why he needed to be gone for so long, and he brushed me off with a shrug or a casual comment that I didn't understand the complexities of his work. His words cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just the absence, it was the implication that my concern or curiosity was somehow trivial. I tried to confront him calmly, to open a dialogue, hoping he would see my perspective and acknowledge the growing strain. Instead, he accused me of overreacting. "You don't understand grown-up issues," he said, leaning back as if the conversation were beneath him. Those words echoed in my mind long after he left the room, leaving a hollow ache that mingled with confusion and hurt. I had devoted myself to supporting him, and yet my efforts were being dismissed as irrelevant, even foolish. The tension seeped into every corner of our life. I began noticing the way he would sigh when I entered a room or glance impatiently at me when I spoke. I started questioning whether I was misreading signals, whether I had changed in ways that made me less appealing to him. But deep down, I sensed something else, a subtle shift in how he valued me, a quiet distancing that made the warmth of our shared life feel frayed. Every morning, I would watch him leave for work, his brief smiles failing to mask a growing detachment. I tried harder to anticipate his needs, to offer comfort or support, yet each gesture seemed to meet only mild irritation or indifference. The home that once felt safe began to feel fragile, like it could collapse under the weight of unspoken grievances. And in those moments of quiet observation, I felt the first stirrings of betrayal. Not a grand revelation, but the slow, unsettling recognition that the man I had trusted and loved was slipping away, piece by piece, leaving me to question not just his commitment, but the value he placed on me. It was the beginning of a fracture, one that would soon widen beyond repair. I had just returned from work one evening when Trent handed me a crisp envelope with an expression I couldn't read. The moment I saw the official letterhead, a chill ran down my spine. My hands trembled as I opened it, and the words inside hit me like a lightning strike. He had filed for divorce. The phrasing was brutal, but what cut the deepest was his justification. In clean, unemotional language, Trent declared I had been a useless wife, incapable of meeting his expectations or contributing meaningfully to our marriage. I froze, unable to speak. My mind spun as disbelief battled with mounting hurt. Every meal I had prepared, every sleepless night spent supporting him, every decision made to preserve our home, all dismissed with a few cold words on a single page. The initial shock was paralyzing. I sank into the nearest chair, staring at the floor, as nausea and disbelief tangled with anger. How could he reduce years of commitment and shared life into such a dismissive insult? I felt stripped bare, humiliated in ways I had never imagined. The person who once whispered, "I love you," in the mornings had now labeled me irrelevant, and the thought of it made my chest tighten with suffocating grief. Outside our walls, the world didn't wait for me to process the betrayal. Neighbors, who had always smiled politely during weekend errands or casual greetings, suddenly seemed to exchange meaningful glances. I caught snippets of hushed conversations, speculative murmurs behind closed doors, and the sensation of invisible eyes judging my work. Even family members, upon hearing the news, were stunned. Their shocked expressions, tight-lipped and heavy with disbelief, added another layer to my anguish. It was as if the fracture between Trent and me had radiated outward, touching everyone I had ever trusted to understand. As the hours passed, an uneasy blend of emotions settled within me. Shame tangled with sorrow, grief wrestled with anger, and a dull, gnawing emptiness reminded me that my devotion had not been seen or valued. I thought of the countless sacrifices I had made, the way I had organized our lives, and the moments I had ignored my own needs to ensure his comfort. Each memory now felt tainted, a bitter reminder of how little it mattered to him. It was in that silence, heavy and suffocating, that I experienced the first real pangs of betrayal. Not merely the act of divorce itself, but the revelation that the man I had trusted to stand beside me had never truly recognized or appreciated my presence. I realized, with a sting that cut deeper than words, that my life with him had been a one-sided endeavor, a performance to sustain an image of partnership that never truly existed. For the first time, the reality of Trent's disregard hit me with full force. The foundation I had built my life upon, trust, shared dreams, love, felt hollow. And in the midst of this chaos, I understood that my journey had irreversibly shifted. The man I loved had discarded me, and I was left alone to confront not just the end of a marriage, but the painful awakening to how deeply I had been underestimated and overlooked. After the initial shock, I withdrew into myself. The walls of our home, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a cage that echoed with Trent's harsh dismissal. I sat alone in the living room for hours, turning over every detail of our life together. Each memory seemed tinted with a new awareness. Laughter that had masked tension, shared decisions that had masked control, affection that had been conditional. I realized I had invested so much of myself in a marriage where my devotion had gone unnoticed. In those quiet moments, I leaned on my closest friend, Mel Rivers. She had been a constant presence through every triumph and heartbreak in my life, offering clarity when my own thoughts felt muddled. I poured out the turmoil swirling inside me, the disbelief, the sense of abandonment, the sting of having my worth questioned by the one person I had trusted most. Maëlle listened without judgment, her eyes steady and compassionate. "You are stronger than he ever gave you credit for," she said. "This doesn't define you. It's his loss, not yours." Her words planted a seed of resilience amidst the grief. As I reflected further, memories that had once seemed trivial now stood out like warning signs I had ignored. The way Trent would twist my words during disagreements, making me feel guilty for expressing simple concern. The casual exaggerations or half-truths he used to present himself favorably in front of friends and family, leaving me second-guessing my perception of reality. The subtle dismissals when I spoke about my needs or desires, almost as if he were conditioning me to doubt my own judgment. It was not just a divorce I was facing. It was a pattern of manipulation and emotional neglect that had eroded the foundation of our marriage over time. Anger bubbled alongside the sadness, sharp and relentless. How had I not seen it sooner? How had I allowed someone to chip away at my sense of self so gradually, so cleverly? And yet, Anger alone was insufficient. Beneath it lay a raw, aching sorrow, the recognition of lost time, of moments I could never reclaim, of dreams quietly deferred to keep peace in a relationship that now felt hollow. Disbelief lingered as well, an almost numb awareness that the person I had trusted implicitly could harbor such disregard and indifference. Late into the night, I allowed myself to feel each emotion fully without judgment. I let the tears flow, and I let the memories sting. But amid the ache, I began to notice a subtle shift. The realization of betrayal, as painful as it was, also brought clarity. I understood that the life I had thought I shared with Trent was not the one I truly deserved. I understood that my sense of self had been diminished not by my own shortcomings, but by his inability to value me. For the first time since the divorce papers arrived, I felt a flicker of resolve. I would not let this heartbreak define me. I would honor the years I had given, not by clinging to them, but by reclaiming my strength and asserting my worth. The road ahead was uncertain, but in the darkness of betrayal, I glimpsed the possibility of rediscovering myself, and perhaps, one day, of finding a life that recognized and cherished the woman I truly was. The first days after facing the reality of Trent's betrayal were heavy, but slowly, I made a decision that changed everything. I would not allow his rejection to dictate the course of my life. For the first time in years, I put myself first, considering what I wanted rather than what I thought he expected. The thought of living in fear or self-doubt no longer seemed acceptable. I began taking practical steps to reclaim control. The process started quietly, with small, deliberate actions. I found a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, a place that felt like a fresh canvas rather than a reminder of broken promises. Packing up our shared belongings, I realized how much of my identity had been tied to our life together. Letting go of objects that had been markers of a perfect marriage felt surprisingly liberating. Alongside establishing a new home, I returned to work in a field I had abandoned years before. I had once put my career on hold to support Trent's ambitions, but now, every email answered and every task completed reinforced a sense of independence I had forgotten I possessed. Each paycheck, though modest, became a symbol of self-reliance, proof that I could sustain myself without relying on his approval or income. Even legal matters became arenas for subtle empowerment. During divorce negotiations, I discovered a quiet strength in advocating for myself. Where I had once deferred to Trent's demands, I now questioned inconsistencies and insisted on fair treatment. With careful strategy and a calm demeanor, I managed to secure a more favorable settlement than I had initially expected. The moment the agreement was finalized, a surge of satisfaction coursed through me. For the first time, I saw the tangible fruits of standing firm, and the confidence it brought was intoxicating. As I moved through these milestones, I began to notice Trent's behavior from a distance. There was a shift in his demeanor, a flicker of frustration whenever I mentioned progress or showed signs of contentment. He underestimated my resilience, assuming the betrayal had left me broken and compliant. Yet, every small victory I achieved served as a quiet counterpoint to his arrogance. I felt a subtle thrill at knowing he had misjudged me so profoundly, that his pride would prevent him from anticipating the life I was quietly building. With each step forward, a new clarity emerged. I recognized that empowerment was not about retaliation in overt ways, but about reclaiming what had been denied to me: dignity, independence, and self-respect. The anger and disappointment that had once consumed me began to transform into focused determination. I could no longer control Trent's actions or opinions, but I could control my own trajectory. By the time I finished unpacking boxes and set up my new routine, I realized something important. This turning point was not just about leaving the past behind. It was about rediscovering the version of myself that had been buried under years of compromise, misunderstanding, and neglect. The sense of freedom, quiet but potent, was exhilarating. Trent had underestimated me, and in doing so, he had unwittingly created the conditions for my strongest comeback. While settling into my new life, a nagging unease wouldn't leave me. Something about Trent's behavior during the divorce had always felt off, a tension I couldn't shake. One afternoon, while reviewing some financial documents I had requested for the settlement, I stumbled across discrepancies that made my heart sink. Transactions that hadn't been disclosed, accounts I had never been informed about, assets quietly moved or hidden. Everything pointed to deliberate concealment. The shock hit me like cold water. For months, I had trusted that we were handling everything transparently, yet here was proof that he had been deceptive, keeping parts of our life from me while portraying normalcy. The anger and betrayal I felt now carried a sharper edge than before. For the first time, the pain of being undervalued intersected with validation. I hadn't imagined Trent's disregard. I had been right to feel unsettled all along. As I dug further, the deception unfolded like a careful puzzle. Hidden accounts, transferred funds, and subtle inconsistencies suggested meticulous planning on Trent's part. My stomach twisted with a mix of revulsion and clarity. This was not just the behavior of a man ending a marriage. This was someone manipulating reality to maintain control and advantage while undermining my trust. The depth of his betrayal was greater than I had feared. I knew I had to act wisely. Anger alone wouldn't serve me now. I began documenting everything meticulously, saving statements, taking notes, and creating a timeline of his actions. Each discovery became a stepping stone, allowing me to understand patterns, anticipate his next moves, and strategize without revealing my awareness. There was a thrill in quietly taking control, a stark contrast to the helplessness I had once felt. At the same time, a subtle suspense hung over every interaction. I pretended ignorance during the occasional calls or emails, listening for slips of information, watching his tone for signs of arrogance or guilt. Each fragment I collected deepened my understanding of his behavior and intentions. He thought he was ahead of me, unchallenged, but I had begun quietly turning the tables. The emotional impact was intense. I felt waves of vindication, but they were tinged with sorrow for the years spent under his shadow. Every revelation underscored how calculated his betrayal had been, and yet, each also fueled a sense of empowerment. I was no longer reacting blindly. I was methodical, deliberate, and increasingly confident in my ability to reclaim what was rightfully. Beneath the shock and anger, a quiet determination settled in. I realized that the real power lay not in confrontation, but in strategy. I would not rush or make impulsive moves that could undermine my position. Instead, I would build my case, protect myself, and ensure that every deception he had relied on would be met with consequences carefully measured to secure justice and restore balance. For the first time since the divorce began, I felt a sense of clarity and control. The betrayal that once left me paralyzed had transformed into a plan, silent, deliberate, and unstoppable. Trent had underestimated me, as he always had. Now, I would make sure he faced the full weight of the truth, while I moved forward with the precision and strength I had quietly cultivated in his absence. With evidence carefully documented and a clear understanding of Trent's deceptions, I knew the next step required precision rather than confrontation. I engaged the legal process strategically, ensuring every hidden asset he had attempted to withhold would be uncovered and addressed. Every form submitted, every request for clarification, became a tool to protect what was rightfully mine. I moved deliberately, confident that his arrogance would blind him to the meticulous work I was quietly undertaking. Trent's overconfidence became my ally. He assumed I was disoriented, distracted by the upheaval of divorce, unaware of the full extent of his concealment. In court meetings and settlement discussions, I presented facts calmly, never revealing the depth of my awareness until it was unavoidable. Each time he expected to maneuver around me, he encountered resistance he hadn't anticipated. His irritation was visible, yet he underestimated the resolve that had taken root inside me, the patience honed by months of careful observation and planning. Outside the courtroom, I devoted energy to reclaiming the life that had been overshadowed by the marriage's imbalance. I sought new social connections, joining local groups that aligned with interests I had abandoned during years of prioritizing Trent. I rekindled passions that had lain dormant, from painting in quiet corners of my apartment to long walks that cleared my mind and strengthened my spirit. The sense of rediscovery was invigorating. Each day brought small victories, moments where I remembered the woman I had once been and glimpsed the one I could now be. The transformation was subtle yet powerful. Friends I had previously lost touch with returned into my life, drawn to my renewed energy and self-assurance. Conversations were lighter, laughter came more easily, and I realized I was no longer tethered to Trent's mood or approval. The weight of constant self-doubt, imposed subtly over years, lifted gradually, revealing a clarity I hadn't known I could feel. Emotional satisfaction grew steadily as legal proceedings concluded in my favor. Seeing the final settlements affirmed that justice could be measured in tangible outcome, but it was more than money or property. It was a recognition that my intelligence, diligence, and resilience could not be ignored. For the first time since the shock of betrayal, I allowed myself to smile genuinely, without the shadow of fear, doubt, or humiliation. The sense of victory was quiet, not gloating, but deeply satisfying. I began to notice the small ways my life had changed. Mornings filled with purposeful activity, evenings shared with friends who valued me, and a sense of calm that replaced constant anxiety. Trent's absence, once a source of pain, now served as a backdrop for my renewal. Each smile, each confident decision, was a quiet rebuttal to the man who had once deemed me worthless. In those moments, I understood that revenge did not need to be dramatic or vengeful. It could be measured, methodical, and profoundly satisfying in its subtlety. By reclaiming control, rebuilding my life, and asserting my worth, I had achieved a satisfaction Trent could never anticipate. The betrayal that once seemed insurmountable had become the catalyst for my strongest, most authentic self. Weeks passed, and I noticed changes in Trent's demeanor. From afar, I could see his carefully maintained composure faltering as he observed my life moving forward without him. He had once assumed that leaving me would ensure my dependence, but instead, I was thriving, building routines, fostering friendships, and embracing opportunities one had long deferred. Each success, however small, seemed to gnaw at him quietly. He attempted subtle maneuvers to reassert control, hoping to project an image of superiority. He would suggest meeting to clarify matters, drop hints of regret, or attempt to remind mutual acquaintances of his achievement. Yet every effort fell flat. I greeted his attempts with polite firmness, never revealing the vulnerability he sought to exploit. The confidence I had cultivated shielded me, and his strategies only highlighted his desperation. The emotional tension during this period was almost tangible. There were fleeting moments when old memories surfaced, times when laughter had felt effortless or when shared plans had once created a sense of security. For a moment, I questioned whether he might be sincere, whether there was a sliver of possibility that reconciliation could ease the sting of betrayal. But each time reality intervened. The manipulation, the underhanded tactics, and the lack of genuine remorse reminded me that my healing depended on maintaining distance, not revisiting what had caused pain. Living fully in my independence became a quiet act of defiance. I relished waking up to mornings filled with my own choices, hosting dinners with friends who valued authenticity, and pursuing projects I had once shelved. Every decision reinforced the realization that my sense of self no longer relied on Trent's approval. The very foundations of our relationship had shifted. He no longer occupied the central space in my life. Where once his opinions directed my actions and emotions, now I operated from clarity, self-assurance, and autonomy. Observing Trent's mounting frustration became almost a confirmation of the progress I had made. His subtle attempts to regain influence revealed a man who had underestimated the resilience and resourcefulness he had once dismissed. The power dynamics had reversed. I was no longer constrained by the fear of his judgment or the need to meet expectations that had never truly been mine to fulfill. Even in private moments, I felt the strength of this transformation. I no longer paused before speaking my mind, doubted my instincts, or deferred to imagined criticism. The liberation was tangible, a lightness of being that had been absent for years. Whereas Trent had once dictated the rhythm of our shared life, I now moved confidently in a space entirely my own, free from the subtle pressures and manipulations that had eroded my self-esteem. By the time our interactions were reduced to necessary exchanges, I sensed a silent acknowledgement in his eyes. He had misjudged me profoundly. But for me, the acknowledgement mattered little. My world was full, rich, and unshakable, and the independence I had claimed became its own reward. Trent's regret, however real or imagined, could not diminish the satisfaction of living a life shaped by my own choices, no longer tethered to the whims or opinions of someone who had once tried to define my world. Sitting in the quiet of my new apartment, I finally allowed myself to look back on everything I had endured. The weight of grief, betrayal, and anger that had once pressed so heavily against my chest now felt tempered by clarity and resolve. Each painful memory, every dismissal, every manipulation, every moment of self-doubt had led me to this point. The journey had been harrowing, but it had also been transformative, shaping a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. I considered the ways I had been wronged, and yet I recognized that revenge, in the form of spiteful actions or public humiliation, would have been hollow. True power lay not in retaliation, but in reclaiming my life with dignity. I had approached the end of my marriage strategically, thoughtfully, and with careful intention. Every step I had taken, legal, emotional, personal, had been a measured act of self-preservation and assertion. This realization brought an unexpected serenity. I had faced betrayal, but I had done so without compromising my own values. The sense of closure was gradual but undeniable. I no longer felt the need to measure my worth through Trent's eyes or seek validation from a man who had once diminished me. My confidence had returned, steady and unwavering. I could smile freely, laugh easily, and enjoy moments of solitude or company without the lingering shadow of fear or insecurity. I had learned that the ultimate triumph was internal, the reclamation of self-respect, the restoration of personal agency, and the acceptance of my own resilience. In these quiet reflections, I also felt the stirrings of hope. While the past would always be a part of me, it no longer dictated my future. The experience had illuminated not just my vulnerabilities, but my capacity for growth, for adaptation, and for joy. I began to consider possibilities previously unimaginable. Friendships built on mutual respect, pursuits that fulfilled my curiosity and creativity, and the potential for a meaningful connection that was untainted by fear or dependence. The emotional payoff was profound. Each act of self-care, every decision made from a place of autonomy, reinforced the truth that I was no longer defined by the cruelty of someone else. Trent's power over me had dissolved entirely, not through confrontation, but through my steadfast commitment to living fully and authentically. In freeing myself from the expectations and manipulations of the past, I had discovered a deep well of self-love and confidence. I pictured a life where past wounds informed wisdom, but did not impose limitations. The thought of future connections, built on trust, respect, and genuine affection, brought a subtle smile to my lips. For the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened, and open to experiences that belonged entirely to me. Looking around my apartment, now filled with small touches that reflected my personality and interests, I understood that this was the culmination of my journey. A life reclaimed, a spirit renewed, and a heart strengthened. Betrayal had tested me, but it had also taught me the invaluable lesson that dignity, resilience, and self-respect are the most potent forms of triumph. I was free. Sitting quietly, I traced the journey I had endured with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Betrayal had arrived suddenly, like a storm tearing through everything I had known, leaving devastation in its wake. Heartbreak had followed, heavy and relentless, forcing me to confront my vulnerabilities in ways I had never anticipated. Yet, through the pain and the uncertainty, I discovered something profound. Resilience is born not from comfort, but from survival. Looking back, I could see the lessons etched into every chapter of my experience. When Trent dismissed my contributions and questioned my worth, he revealed not my limitations, but his own blindness. Every moment of manipulation, every act of disregard, became a mirror reflecting the strength I had yet to fully recognize in myself. It was not revenge in its typical form that brought satisfaction. It was the reclamation of my own life, a deliberate and unwavering assertion of value that he could neither control nor diminish. The process had been gradual and deliberate. I rebuilt routines, re-established independence, and cultivated a sense of self that no longer relied on anyone else's validation. The quiet victories, whether legal, personal, or emotional, were cumulative, building a foundation of confidence that no insult or betrayal could shake. Each step reinforced a truth that had been hidden for far too long. My worth was never contingent on someone else's approval. Reflecting on the path from devastation to empowerment, I realized that reclaiming oneself is the most potent form of justice. When a person seeks to diminish you, the ultimate response is not to fight them in their terms, but to rise above their judgment and thrive in ways they cannot anticipate. By prioritizing my growth, by nurturing strength and dignity, I had achieved something far more enduring than vengeance: liberation. The moral of my experience is simple yet profound. Even when someone devalues you, even when they attempt to erase your significance from their life and the world around them, your true power lies in reclaiming your worth. The world cannot strip away the self-awareness, resilience, and determination that you cultivate within yourself. That realization transformed despair into purpose, hurt into determination, and humiliation into empowerment. Now, as I embrace each day with clarity and intention, I recognize the beauty of having survived and flourished despite profound betrayal. The scars remain, but they are no longer weights. They are reminders of strength earned, wisdom gained, and courage cultivated. I face the future with confidence, knowing that no one's opinion can redefine my identity or diminish my accomplishment. He called me useless, but I am unstoppable. From the ashes of heartbreak, I emerged whole. Betrayal had tested me, grief had tempered me, revenge had sharpened me, and empowerment had liberated. My story is a testament to the power of endurance and self-respect, a reminder that true victory lies not in what others lose, but in the life you reclaim for yourself. I am no longer defined by his dismissal, by his failure to see me, or by the pain he inflicted. I am defined by my strength, my choices, and my unwavering commitment to honor myself above all else. In the end, the journey from betrayal to triumph is not only possible, it is transformative. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away, or should I have given him another chance? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If you want more stories like mine, subscribe and hit the notification bell.